Today, I am going to tell you an interesting story. The heroine of today's tale had a hobby. She collected men. And her collection, I must say, was impressive. You all remember Grace Kelly, the Hollywood diva who became the Princess of Monaco? Behind that fairy tale facade, however, there was a tragedy that few people know about. Imagine this: a beautiful, successful woman basking in the glow of fame, yet carrying sadness and disappointment in her heart. She attracted men like a magnet, but luck and love never favored her. Sometimes she got involved with an overgrown drunk who never seemed to grow up, or with an aging Don Juan who could have been her father. Her luck in love was catastrophic. Now picture this: the French Riviera, bright sunlight, the 13th of September, 1982. A young gendarme, Frédéric Monime, a real French charmer, is leaving a bakery with a crisp croissant in hand, enjoying life. Suddenly, right in front of him, appears a car, an elegant coffee-colored Rover. And who is behind the wheel? None other than the Princess of Monaco herself, Grace Kelly. Monime instinctively salutes, and she smiles so sweetly and waves her hand, just like in the movies. Half an hour later, his office phone rings. One call that turns everything upside down. He picks up the receiver, listens, pales, and without a word, rushes to his car. Imagine what must have been going through his mind. He speeds to the prince's villa, and there, a crowd of people, frightened faces shouting, "Chaos!" Princess Caroline, Grace's daughter, running toward his car in tears. "Save my mother." And then he sees it: the crushed Rover lying at the foot of a cliff. The car had rolled several times down the rocky slope. There was almost no chance of survival. Yet despite everything, the princess was still breathing. You know how it is in life. Hope dies last. She was barely pulled from the car, but saving her was impossible. The next day, she passed away in the hospital without ever regaining consciousness. And so the life of one of the most beautiful and famous women in the world ended. Now, attention, lovers of mystical coincidences. Grace Kelly's life was split into two equal halves. For exactly 26 years, she was the American Grace Kelly, first a model, then an actress, and finally a movie star. And for exactly 26 years, she was the wife of one of Europe's wealthiest monarchs. Isn't that eerie symmetry? It is as if fate deliberately divided her life in two. Did you know that American women often married European aristocrats? At the beginning of the last century, Europe counted 42 princesses, 64 baronesses, and 124 countesses born in the United States. That is some statistics. But here's the difference: all those countesses and baronesses were daughters of millionaires. Grace Kelly, however, was born to an ordinary stonemason. She achieved everything herself. Shall we continue diving into Grace Kelly's life? Now, I will tell you where the girl who captured the heart of the Prince of Monaco came from. Grace's father, Jack Kelly, was a true American self-made man. He began as a simple stonemason, you understand. But as they say, talent finds its way. In 1920, he became an Olympic rowing champion. Can you imagine the sensation? He returned home as a national hero. Most importantly, he knew how to convert his fame into money. He became a contractor, then the head of the Philadelphia Democratic Party, and even ran for mayor. What a rise. Jack Kelly was a typical Irishman, tall, broad-shouldered, handsome. He married a tall German woman, an athlete and a women's rights activist, a true union of strong personalities. Jack and Margaret Kelly had 3 daughters, perfect Barbie dolls, and a son who could rival even Tarzan. This Kelly was a mountain of muscle, ambitious, and to be honest, not particularly bright. But he pleased his father by taking first place in the single sculls at the 1948 Olympics. What a family! It seemed that the Kelly family was the perfect embodiment of the American dream. They had grown wealthy, and Jack built a massive 17-room mansion near the working-class suburbs of Philadelphia. Now his daughters felt like real princesses among their poorly dressed friends. In summer, the whole family splashed in the pool, the only one on the street. The pool was made from a cleanly washed cement mixer brought from their father's company. Ingenious, isn't it? In the autumn evenings, everyone gathered around the first television in the neighborhood. Margaret Kelly kept her daughters in strict discipline, cooking, knitting, embroidery. Later, Grace would shudder recalling this domestic drill. She said, "I do not want to say that my mother behaved like a Nazi, but her character was very Teutonic. I still call her my old Prussian mother." Can you imagine that? Yet despite the strictness, the daughters sometimes rebelled. What could you do? The Irish blood showed itself. Grace, however, was remarkably obedient compared to her sisters. Little, meek, and quiet, she constantly sniffled from endless colds. She quietly sat in a corner, playing theater with her dolls. Hard to imagine, but this timid girl would one day become a global star. Now let us move from the American heartland to the very core of European aristocracy. Imagine a young Louis-Henri Maxence Bertrand, a prince on a white horse, the son of Count Pierre Polignac and Princess Charlotte Louise Juliette, daughter of Prince Louis II of Monaco. Just think about those names. Noble, wealthy, always in military uniform. A dream. This Louis-Henri was preparing to liberate France from the Nazis. He was interested in tanks, vintage cars, and mature women. Yes, you heard that right. If someone had shown him this snotty American girl and said she would be his future wife, he would have been horrified. Meanwhile, Grace grew up. She was sent to a convent school, you understand? They thought they would turn her into a proper lady. And what do you think? She became a real lady, but with her own unique charm. She left the convent as a devout Catholic, yet an unusual character had begun to form inside her, one that terrified her family and thrilled her admirers. A true Hollywood snow queen. The nuns later recalled that there was no more exemplary student than Grace in their boarding school, yet they had no idea that she taught the other girls to smoke and kept watch when her friends stole sweets from the kitchen. What a saintly girl. Grace once told Alfred Hitchcock that the most indecent jokes she had ever heard were at that convent school, when she was only 13. That's where she learned about life. By this time, the perpetually sickly, quiet girl had transformed into a real beauty. Her Irish father's genes combined with her mother's German blood gave a stunning effect. Friends from her youth said she simply radiated. God clearly did not skimp on the colors when creating Grace Kelly. The Second World War was ending, and Grace's peers donned military uniforms. Their lives could be taken tomorrow, so they wanted to experience everything today. The patriarchal norms of one-story America were cracking at the seams. Grace fell in love. Her chosen one was Harper Davis, the son of a real estate dealer. But Grace's father did not approve of him. He simply refused him. And Grace, being the obedient daughter she was, accepted his decision. That was the end of her first love. They only met again several years later when the paralyzed Davis was dying in a military hospital. Grace spent entire days at his bedside. Later, as a famous actress, she said that Harper was the great love of her life. But at that time, after their separation, she quickly forgot him. New romances began. Teenagers were captivated by Grace. They loved that she was accommodating. When they wanted to dance, she danced. When they wanted to drink beer, she went along. A true American girl. And imagine this. She left her innocence behind casually, almost mundanely. In her final year of school, she went to visit a friend who wasn't home. Then, out of nowhere, the friend's husband appeared and offered Grace coffee and a chat. Well, as they say, it was a matter of technique. They ended up in bed. The most interesting part? Neither of them understood why it had happened. Grace had no feelings for this man and never saw him again. That's life. Here begins a completely different chapter. Grace moved to New York and enrolled in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Can you imagine how shocked her provincial parents were? From the age of 14, she spent all her time in movie theaters, performing in amateur plays. But Jack Kelly looked on this nonsense with affectionate indulgence, thinking she would live in New York for a while, then return home and marry. He never imagined that Grace would surpass him in every way, and he never forgave her for that. In his 17-room mansion on the outskirts of Philadelphia, only the blonde girl Grace was known. Grace Kelly, the movie star, simply did not exist there. Meanwhile, what about our Prince Louis Henri? The war was over, and he joined an expedition organized by the Oceanographic Museum, named after his grandfather. Imagine it. Exotic countries, scientific discoveries, adventures. Then he spent hunting season in southern France like a true nobleman. After that, he attended a series of lectures at Cambridge. Now that's a life. Of course, the best families in Europe had their eyes on such a desirable groom, but he valued his independence and was in no rush to choose. Meanwhile, Grace quickly advanced her career. It turned out she was not only descended from stonemasons and athletes. Her father's brother, George, was a famous playwright and Pulitzer Prize winner, and her late aunt was a vaudeville star. That's where Grace got her artistic talent. She graduated from the academy, debuted successfully on stage, started appearing on television and in advertisements. Money was no longer a problem. She paid for her own housing and education. Her virtue of obedience paradoxically coexisted with her desire for independence. She was slender, graceful, exquisitely dressed, and at first glance seemed cold and reserved. But only friends knew the warm, open, and tender person she truly was. Lovers were amazed by how different daytime Grace was from the Grace they encountered in private. A real paradox. Then came Alex Darcy, a famous Hollywood actor. He had his approach to women. He said, "If you want to, my dear, fine. If not, I'm happy just knowing you." Imagine Alex Darcy, that Hollywood ladies' man, gently touching Grace's sculpted knee and starting his rehearsed line. But not this time. He didn't finish the sentence before Grace threw herself around his neck. As they later recalled, she gave the old charmer a truly wild night. What a twist. But Grace's adventures did not end there. Don Richardson, her teacher at the academy, once rejected a rude student who had been pursuing Grace. He walked her home while she sobbed. He went to the kitchen for coffee, and when he returned, Miss Kelly had stripped completely and was waiting for him, comfortably settled on the sofa. Talk about speed. Their romance, which began so intensely, ended just as quickly. There was talk of marriage, but again, the Kelly family intervened. They did not accept a Jewish groom. Moreover, Margaret Kelly, like a true Sherlock Holmes, had seized a moment to search Don's suitcase and discovered a pack of condoms and a letter from his estranged wife. That was enough to ruin him in their eyes. The seducer was thrown out of the house in disgrace, and any thoughts of marriage vanished. Grace obeyed her mother, as she always did. But back in New York, she resumed living with Richardson in a common-law relationship. They separated after Dawn found a familiar sapphire bracelet on her in bed, a gift from Prince Ali Khan, the notorious playboy, to one of his conquests. Dawn could not take it. He threw the bracelet into the fish tank, pulled up his pants, and headed for the door. But as he turned, he saw Grace, not even looking at him, carefully retrieving her trinket from the aquarium. That's the story. Psychologists suggest that in childhood she lacked parental affection and unconsciously sought a substitute. Grace was also very infantile and tried to continue the type of relationships she had with her peers in college. She had a romance with a 50-year-old hotel restaurateur, Philippe von Waldorf, a real Don Juan and adventurer. She even planned to marry him, but her mother intervened, and once again, the story ended in nothing. At one point, an Iranian Shah visiting New York began to court the young theater actress. Eventually, he proposed. Can you imagine? But she had no desire to go to Persia. The press covered the Shah's interest extensively. Once Margaret Kelly heard about it, she immediately flew to her daughter. Grace never met the Shah again, but refused to return his diamond set. She told her mother, "Mother, that's not how you treat kings." Grace kept these royal treasures in her lingerie drawer, like trophies. But she did not give up and continued seeking love. She even attempted to marry theater actor Gene Lyons, a talented man but an inveterate alcoholic. Yet again, Mother Kelly intervened. She gave Grace a stern look and said, "Think carefully, Gracie. Is this the man you truly need?" Just like in the movies. Later, while filming in Africa, Grace had a romance with none other than Clark Gable, yes, the idol of millions. She was not even fazed by his false teeth, but as soon as the crew moved to London, nosy English reporters discovered the affair. And what did Margaret Kelly do? Like a supermother, she took a plane across the Atlantic, never leaving her daughter's side, escorting her and Gable back to America. Grace fell into a severe depression that lasted for months. Her spirits were lifted by charming French actor Jean-Pierre Aumont, with whom she filmed television shows. Then came Ray Milland, a film star, a drunk, and a brute. Grace even brought him to Philadelphia to meet her parents, but Jack Kelly treated him the same as Richardson. He should have been more polite. Milland, unlike the gentle director, was a tough man. He had served in assault aviation throughout the war and feared no Philadelphia contractor. He nearly fought Grace's father, cursed him out, and left with a loud slam of the door. Grace wept, but as a good girl, she did not defy her parents' will. Next came the famous designer Oleg Cassini, with whom she almost married. Then came the legendary Bing Crosby, and many, many others. At every film set, Grace Kelly sparked a romance, often more than one. Hitchcock, strict from Jesuit training, was astounded. He would just raise his eyebrows and say, "The Snow Queen of Hollywood, Snow Queen indeed. Gracie sleeps with everyone. She doesn't even have enough actors left. She's even slept with a lousy screenwriter." One could say that a healthy dose of pleasurable, wholesome sex was part of Grace's life philosophy. The romances continued, as did the filming. In less than 10 years, she experienced many men and became a movie star. Now let us move to Monaco. In 1949, Louis Henri became Prince Rainier III. And here begins the most interesting part. The new monarch took charge of his principality, which was, to put it mildly, in poor condition. The casino, the main source of Monaco's income, was generating less and less money. New sources of revenue had to be found urgently, and Prince Rainier succeeded. Within 10 years, major banks, attracted by low taxes, opened offices in Monaco. He knew what he was doing. He even foresaw the future. He knew that someday American astronauts would use electric razors in orbit labeled "Made in Monaco." That is foresight. Grace, meanwhile, was not wasting time either. She loved her craft passionately and worked tirelessly on set. Of course, she could never have become a great theater actress. She lacked the dramatic depth needed for the stage. But the camera adored her. On screen, Grace was irresistible, far more interesting and significant than in real life. She also possessed a rare quality. She could appear delicate and defenseless, and men she encountered felt compelled to help her. Yet behind that innocent exterior was a determined force moving steadily toward her goal, and they realized it too late. Grace had excellent business acumen. She could captivate the attention of any man she needed. By 1956, she had become a true star, the first Hitchcock actress to appear in multiple box office hits. She won an Academy Award for her role in The Country Girl. She was simply fortunate. Hollywood had an opening for a cool blonde, and Grace immediately filled it. The era of sweaters, free love, dance halls, and miniskirts was beginning. On screen, Grace Kelly seemed a true lady, untouchable, coolly erotic. Hitchcock knew that a lady in the bedroom stirred more than a prostitute, and he filmed her accordingly. She quickly became one of the iconic figures of the United States, and here she was, a lady adventurer, a girl roaming the city at night with pajamas in her bag, understandable yet elusive, simple yet unpredictable. That was how moviegoers adored her, and that was how Prince Rainier III himself fell in love with her. The ruler of Monaco was single, which worried his subjects. Did you know that if he had died childless, the principality would have become part of France, and the citizens would have been taxed by the French? That was the scenario at stake. By this time, the prince had grown tired of his affair with French actress Gisèle Pascal. She was not his ideal. He sought a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes that sparkled with golden flecks. He told journalists repeatedly about this preference. Quite the thing of his. In 1954, during the filming of To Catch a Thief in Monte Carlo, he met Grace. Fate, as they say. And a year later, at the Cannes Film Festival, he proposed. Talk about speed. Grace unconsciously sought someone who could replace her father while also being a true man. In this, and in everything else, the prince was perfect. A real prince, you understand. And this time, Grace's parents had no objections. Finally, they had found a suitable match for their daughter. They truly loved each other, although their relationship had a strong rational component. The ruler of Monaco needed healthy heirs, and Grace Kelly needed a good husband. Everything was honest, everything adult. Their wedding was called the wedding of the century. Grace received everything she had ever dreamed of. In April 1956, she became Princess of Monaco. But what happened next? You would not believe it. From then on, she was never truly happy. Grace had a kingdom of 1.5 square kilometers, 2,000 subjects, 300 policemen, 82 soldiers, 14 18th century cannons, and a palace with 4 watchtowers. She had a 200-room palace, a large yacht, a private zoo, and a garage with 25 antique cars. She bore 3 lovely children. Yet she was unbearably bored. She left cinema, no longer performed on stage, and longed for her beloved craft. Later, she tried reading poetry aloud, but it did not fill her life. Imagine the despair. Grace, Princess of Monaco, engaged in charity, opened circus festivals, and traveled extensively. She arranged compositions of dried flowers and displayed them in her Paris gallery. Her work sold well, and all the money was donated to children's homes. Yet it was not enough. Grace aged and found herself drawn to young men. In the 70s, she spent much time in Paris with a young Austrian director, Robert Dornhelm. That is the story. And you know, friends, this fairy tale, which came to life, turned out to be infinitely boring. With each passing year, Grace Grimaldi lost the charm of Grace Kelly. Today, we would see simply a plump, gray-haired woman whose former beauty no one would remember. But fate, as it happens, showed mercy. That ill-fated rover, which plunged off the cliff, carried her straight into legend. And there she lives still, eternally young, charming. And this story is no longer about a princess, but about a simple girl who married a prince. If you like this story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Click the little bell so you do not miss a single video. Write in the comments if you see any mistakes, if something is unclear, or if you disagree with any part. And by the way, what do you think of this story?